Hi and welcome back to my channel. My name's Lauren and I do sewing and crochet. I have been seeing loads of pictures on Pinterest and it's given me loads of inspiration for a pair of checkery gingham trousers. I picked this really heavyweight cotton up at the end of last year, I think, and I'm finally getting around to using it. My only thing about working with gingham is you've got to be really conscious of pattern matching. So with a floral you don't need to pattern match as much, or if it's a very small print you don't need to pattern match as much. But because these are pretty bold squares over the whole of the fabric, I do just need to be conscious of how my patterns are going to match up. I was just trying to make a fun real transition and I just tipped my plant over instead. Definitely not what I needed this morning. I've just cut out my first pattern piece. I've added quite a bit of extra length onto the bottom because something that I really hate is making a pair of trousers and then them ending up too short, so I'd rather them be way too long and be able to like take that extra bit up. A yoke on the back, so I'll be able to add that piece in as well. I've got my pattern weight pebbles. It's been such a long time since I've worked with gingham and I just want to be really conscious when I'm sewing and cutting out my pieces as to where those squares are and how they're going to line up with my seam allowance, because it would be amazing if I was able to pattern match the trousers all the way around. It's so easy to pin things in place and make them all lined up, but the real test is when it comes to sewing. My pockets are looking pretty well attached. I've done like a double stitch around, so you can get a needle that does this. However, I have just freehanded it, which is why there's a few little wobbles in there, but I think it just adds a really nice finish. My next step that I'm going to do is sew this curved seam. So what I've done is put them wrong sides together, and as I just mentioned, I'm going to do a flat fell seam. So I sew, this curve is all sewn in place, and what I've done on the flipped side is cut back that seam allowance to make it a lot smaller. And then what I'm going to do is fold the longer seam allowance over on itself and then fold it over again and then stitch along this folded line to give us that flat filled seam look. This is one of the most secure ways of joining two pieces of fabric because ultimately they're stitched twice. This little circle that I've got here, or this little shape even, sort of like quarter circle that I've got here, is attached to my inside pocket piece, and what the goal is that when the pocket is all lined up, that is the bit that shows, so then it's not that you have some mishmash piece of that corner, it's just that little bit that blends in quite nicely with the fabric. My lines don't quite match up, which I think is okay. It doesn't bother me too much because everything else is looking pretty well matched up, so I think it's quite a minor detail. But it's definitely looking really good and I'm really pleased with how it's coming out. Here is the one that I've done already. So now where it was sort of a curved piece, it's all stitched up together, sewn down these edges to hold everything in place. And then this is the outside with the pocket. A tip that I came across on Instagram a while back is when sewing pockets, especially if they're going to be square pockets, is doing a slight couple of diagonal stitches instead of just pivoting 90 degrees, sort of doing 2 stitches of diagonal, because then you're able to turn your pocket out easily and get any little dusty pocket lint bits out, and it's less likely to actually build up in that gap. I've lined I've got my zip in place, I've got my like protective piece, and then this sort of fly piece I've got in here as well. And what I want is to try my best to pattern match up this front section, so even though it's kind of on an angle, like this white piece is coming in, that one's going into that. I've pinned these in place, so then hopefully now when I mark everything else up, it won't shimmy, and I can end up with a nice pattern matched trouser. Inside is looking like a hot mess, but I've flipped it over and now I'm gonna sew this zip here onto this fly piece. So then you're securing the other half of the zip onto the other side of the trouser. I need to overlock that seam there because that is actually messy. My zipper is all in place, everything is just a little neater on the inside and seems to line up pretty well, I think. So I'm really happy with that. I lost a couple of needles on the way because when I went to sew over this section I definitely forgot that I had a metal zipper in. I'm still just wondering where the pointed end is, but it'll come up. It's probably pinged somewhere, I think. So this is going to be a flat felled seam in the middle that goes all the way up and down the other side. Then what I'll do is turn everything right sides inside and then sew up those side seams. I definitely underestimated how long pinning would take to pattern match gingham. The sewing itself, going through the sewing machine, is just always the quickest part, and it's the cutting and the pinning and the ironing and the double checking that takes such a long time, and the refitting. But I can definitely tell you from looking at the trousers and having them finished that taking a bit of extra time to pin all the gingham squares in place was definitely worth it. My next step is to create my flat felled seam. I have sewn my fabrics wrong sides together, so the side that's facing up now is the right sides. As I'm doing here, I'm folding both the short and the long pieces of seam allowance over towards me, making sure that the bigger piece of seam allowance is able to cover and wrap round the shorter piece of seam allowance. Then once I've encased both of the raw edges, I pin that in place, and it's normally a little easier, but I am pinning quite often so I can make sure that my patterns are still matched and that my gingham stripes go all the way along. But then you just carry on doing that, and once you get into the hang of it, it's kind of really easy and very simple to do. Editing my footage now, I realised that I didn't actually film attaching the waistband and hemming the trousers, so those are the two final steps. But enjoy me hoovering up the mess that I made, and thank you for watching my video, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one. Bye!